And I believe most of you know our guest speaker tonight. James has been a member of the Historical Society of Ottawa for many years and is currently our communications director. And communicating history is Mcgee. He continues to do presentations on behalf of the HSO for community groups, not just in Ottawa, but across Canada. Thanks to Zoom, James has been able to do presentations for groups such as Seniors Without Walls in places as far away as St. Catharines. So people all over Ontario are hearing about Ottawa's history, thanks to James. James also has a website, Today in Ottawa History. If you're looking for that, just go to Google and type Today in Ottawa History, and it will come up. You can also check out more Ottawa stories at James right here at our HSO website. And in addition to all that, James has also written 3 books about the history of banking and currency in Canada, which is fitting since James worked at the Bank of Canada. Somehow through all this, he's managed to find time to research more about Ottawa's rich history. And tonight, James is going to talk about the research he has done on professional and amateur sports in our city. Although, as I mentioned earlier, he may not want to mention much about the 2022 Senators.
I feel very honored to be the lead-off speaker of the 2022 season. Tonight I'm going to talk about, I call it sporting vignettes from old Ottawa. I'm looking at really sports during the 19th century. Perhaps another time we'll go to the 20th century, but so this is really looking at old Ottawa through from up till around 1900, shortly afterwards. So what I'm going to do is covering a lot of territory here. It's really hard to do justice to this topic because sports was really big in the 19th century. Of course, this was long before other distractions which we know of. You know, there was no video games, no television, no radio, and notwithstanding the fact that people worked very long days, 6 days a week, sports was huge. So what I'll do is dabble in a number of sports, looking at lacrosse, cricket, baseball, horse racing, tennis, football, hockey, cycling, and some skiing. For lack of time, I'm missing a few, like hose reel racing. It was an interesting one for a while. If there's time, if people are interested, I can say a word about that. Hunting. But one thing I found kind of ominous was the 1876 first pedestrian hunt, which sounded intriguing. But I'll give those a pass and to focus on the big ones. Starting off with lacrosse or cricket. Now, what is our national sport? Well, back in 1994, the federal government announced that lacrosse was Canada's official summer game, with hockey our official winter game. And then certainly in the 19th century, lacrosse was huge in Eastern Canada. Today, I don't know how many people have witnessed lacrosse games, but certainly back in the 19th century, it was a big toss-up between whether lacrosse or cricket was the #1 sport for Canadians. And this was a sport that predated the arrival of settlers Europeans. It was a First Nations sport that in its earlier forms could take days to play, involving huge communities, all members of the community. And it was sort of like a war through other means. It was quite the event. Leave it to a Montrealer, William Beers, to codify, made a modern version of it in 1860. And this sort of slimmed down version of the game became very popular throughout Canada, United States, and it was even went over to Britain. And this was a sport, perhaps not surprising given the history, that First Nation teams competed very successfully against settler teams. And there's a picture there of actually of a team from the Mohawk Nation, Kanawaki. They were the 1869 Canadian lacrosse champions. Here in Ottawa, during the 1860s, there were at least 4 lacrosse teams, and Ottawa lacrosse team, Montcalm, Britain's Victoria lacrosse team, the Young Britain's lacrosse team, and it was quite a popular event. Interesting, in early July of 1865, there was a match between the Ottawa lacrosse team and an Iroquois team at Majors Hill. Now, I say Majors Hill, not Majors Hill Park, because it was yet to be a park, and they played on a slope. I'm not sure how that was done. A lot of fans, about 1,500 fans, despite a drizzle coming down. The Ottawa team emerged victorious out of the best of 5 series. The Iroquois team won the first game. The news accounts of it described what the Iroquois team wore: leggings, green trunks, braided worsted belts, and caps and feathers. The Ottawa team just wore their usual lacrosse dress, which unfortunately I don't know what that was, as clearly everybody knew about it at the time. And after the sports, they did what many people do after a sporting event. They went out and went out to the local pub and had a drink. They say a lemonade as well, but I think it was more the hard stuff. They did mention that as well. But cricket was also very big in Bytown. It started in 1840, the Carlton Cricket Club. It was dissolved a few years later, but it started up again in 1849 by the postmaster, Mr. G.P. Baker, and Mr. Clemo, F. Clemo, later Senator Clemo Avenue fame. In 1859, with the change in name for Bytown becoming Ottawa, the Bytown Cricket Club becomes the Ottawa Cricket Club. In 1867, Lord Monck, the Governor General at the time, set aside 10 acres of land at Rideau Hall for a cricket pitch, and it's still going strong today. And on most weekends through the summer, if you're interested in watching a great cricket game, just go out to Rideau Hall, and it's a great way to have a picnic and watch the game and going on in front of you. Here's actually the recorded in the Ottawa Citizen of a game played in May of 1854 between the single and married men of the Bytown Cricket Club. See, there was 2 innings. The singles won her first 2 games, each of 2 innings. The married men won the 3rd game, 68 to 67 runs and 10 wickets. That means that they really crushed the singles. They didn't have to play the rest of their 2nd innings. And the Citizen reported that the youngins did very well yesterday, but they appear to be entirely overmatched. So this is, as I said, this was a really big sport in early Ottawa, in Bytown. There was a lot of discussion, actually, which was the more important sport, lacrosse or cricket. In 1869, the Ottawa Daily Citizen reported that cricket was growing in popularity, and deservedly so, since it was, quote, both a graceful and manly game and a healthy exercise. And the newspaper thought that cricket was overtaking lacrosse in popularity, at least in Ottawa. In 1872, August 27th, 1872, that was a civic holiday, there was a huge cricket match up at Rideau Hall. It was England 11 versus the Canada 22. Now, that was England had 11 players, Canada had 22, twice as many players. There were some 3,000 or more fans, and some of these were the greatest English players of all time. There's a picture there of William G. Grace, who's reputedly the best cricketer of all time. Also there at the game was a man called Cuthbert Ottaway, and he was considered the most versatile athlete of the time, of the age. The English 11, notwithstanding only having half the players of the Canadian team, crushed Canada. Grace, who was sick at the time, still scored 73 runs. And if you know anything about cricket, that's a pretty darn good showing. At a lopsided English victory, 201 to 43, 201 to 43 runs. Here's a picture of a few years later, the Ottawa Cricket Club. You can see a look quite dapper in their cricket white clothes. there was also, besides cricket and lacrosse, there was baseball was very popular in Canada, in southern Ontario, all the way out to Ottawa area. And in fact, in 1838, it was sort of seemed to be the start of the Canadian baseball. It's in Beachville in southern Ontario. The first sort of game, it was a form of called town ball, where it was a community event. Everybody came out. And the Canadian baseball rules were somewhat different. They had 5 bases. I can't envisage where the 5th base was, a square infield. And you've heard of spitballs. Well, they had Canadian teams had a practice of soaking balls, so went beyond spitballs. So they had a very distinct form of baseball. In the 1850s, Knickerbocker rules and New York rules, which would standardize the game in the States, came to Canada. Here in Ottawa, a lacrosse player, a man called Tom Clough, introduced the game to Ottawa, and forming the Ottawa Baseball Club with a 10-acre field at the end of Elgin Street, close to the canal. Apparently, they had a 7 to 8 foot fence around this field with grandstands established. Drinks were served. It was dry, no beer. But anyway, before in 1877, 100 years before the Blue Jays took the field, the London Tecumsehs won, let's say, the first international championship for a Canadian team. They downed the Pittsburgh Alleghenies. There's a picture there of that team in 1877. Other Canadian teams were like the Guelph Maple Leafs were also very strong players at the time, taking on U.S. teams. And quite almost heretically, a man called Samuel Hill, in a recent article in the Indiana Journal of Global Legal Studies, looked at baseball in Canada, and he claimed that if it wasn't baseball being the national summer game of the United States, he figured it would be the national sport of Canada. He also pointed out that Babe Ruth scored his first minor league home run in Toronto in 1916. But also on that incredible August 27th, 1872 day, it was an incredible game for sports in Ottawa. The Boston Red Stockings took on the Ottawa Baseball Club in the opening game at that Elgin Street field. Prior to that game in the afternoon, the Red Stockings watched the cricket game, Grace and company playing at Rideau Hall. They thought the batting was great, but it was a darn slow game. The Boston Red Stockings should not be confused with today's Boston Red Sox. They later became the Boston Braves in 1912, and then in 1952 became the Atlanta Braves. So the Atlanta Braves is the same team as the old Boston Red Stockings. Now, back in the 1871-72, Boston Red Stockings were probably the most powerful, the best baseball team, professional baseball team in the United States, in North America. Salaries ranged from about $1,800 to $2,800 per person. They seldom lost. When they came, they played up Ottawa. They won 64-0. The Carl McVeigh, who's a picture there, their catcher, scored 9 runs himself. The Ottawa Citizen generously reported a score of 18 earned runs to 0. Now, 64-0, that's a pretty convincing win or a convincing loss for Ottawa, but Ottawa did better than a Toronto Dauntless team, it was called. They lost 68-0 to Boston. This was unusual at the time. Boston, up till 1872, when they played Ottawa, they'd only lost 3 games. They'd won 40, and most of them had the team they took on never even got to first base. They did come. Boston team came back to Ottawa the following year in 1873. And Ottawa did much better. They actually got 4 runs. They lost, though, 41-4. Now switching off, going to the turf. It should come as no surprise that horse racing was a very popular pastime in the 19th century Canada, and Ottawa was no exception. In 1869, the Ottawa Turf Club opened up with the patronage of the Governor General, Sir John Young, later known as Lord Lisgar. President was Joseph Aumont, Nicholas Sparks, a well-known name in Ottawa, Vice President, and Edward Barber, Secretary. And a couple of years later, the Muchmore Driving Park and Turf Hotel was owned by Ralph Muchmore and Edward Barber, opened up for business. Now, Muchmore Driving Park is just where the Muchmore Public School is today. And in the following year, Ottawa won the right to run the Queen's Plate, which was then and still today the most prestigious horse race in Canada. It first ran in 1860 in Toronto. It would have been organized by a man called Sir Casimir Gazowski, who was the president of the Toronto Turf Club. And the idea was to have a horse race supported the patronage of the Queen Victoria, to promote Canadian horse rearing. And in fact, Queen Victoria gave 50 guineas annually for first prize. Now, 50 guineas was, well, guinea was an old measure of British currency. 1 guinea was £1, 1 shilling. There had been a guinea coin up into the early 1800s, but it was after that point, it was really used for things that were sporting and for the arts. Even into the 1960s, people sold things in guineas. It was worth, it's about $260 Canadian. In fact, 50 guineas is given annually, even now, to the winner of the Queen's Plate. When the member of the royal families at the event itself, it's given in a nice velvet bag of actual gold coins, but typically it's a bank draft. Back in 1872, there's 2 days of racing at the Muchmore Driving Park. There's an advertisement on the left. It was in the Ottawa Daily Citizen. And you'll see the Queen's Plate, $2,850 in purses. Considerable sum for the time. Queen's Plate, of course, was the main attraction. It was the third race in the afternoon of May 31st, with Lord Lisgar in attendance. Huge crowds are there, some coming as far away as the United States. And so there's a prize of $256 or 50 guinea prize, plus additional money, prize money from entrance fees. And the Ottawa Turf Club provided $100 for the second place. You can see the other races in the ad. There's the hurdle race, the Stewart's Plate, Memorial Plate, Members Plate, Carlton Plate, Lumberman's Purse, etc. So it was a really 2 days of a lot of racing. In the Queen's Plate, 6 horses ran the 1.5 mile length. The winner was Fear Not, ridden by and trained by Richard Leary and owned by Alexander Simpson. And Leary, the jockey, received a gold-mounted riding whip. The Ottawa Turf Club later became mired in controversy. A couple of years later, in 1874, the club held a deer hunt as a grand finale of one of their days. What happened was, like, a half-starved deer was released on the field after the horse races. It was barely able to run, having been cooped up in a small cage overnight. The plan was for it to run off into the bush, nearby bush, and be chased by hunting dogs. Instead, it just stumbled into the crowds and where the carriages were parked, and within 10 seconds was torn to bits amidst all the spectators. People were horrified. The Ottawa Daily Citizen said that this was a case for the SPCA and hoped that Ottawa would never again be asked to patronize such a sport. The Ottawa Turf Club, in fact, disappeared. The Queen's Plate did come back to Ottawa, hosted by the Ottawa Racing Association in 1880. After that, the fixture, the Queen's Plate was moved permanently to Toronto, first to the old and now the new Woodbine race course. But the winner in the 1880 race was Bonnie Bird, ridden by the same person, the same jockey who won the race in 1872. But a particular Ottawa version of racing was the winter trots. This is ice racing. It started around about the 1860s that we see the first reference to it in papers. racing on the Rideau Canal from Bank Street to the Deep Cut, which is sort of where Ottawa University is, so roughly. In the mid-70s, there was a very good ice track established at Limy Lake in Quebec. And the Democrat newspaper, Rochester newspaper in the States, called it the most perfect ice track in America. Wherever there was a nice big surface of water, ice tracks were formed in Canada and upstate New York. For example, at Port Perry, had a lovely ice track. The races at Limy Lake were held under the auspices of the Winter Trotting Club at Crystal Park, it was called. Initially, they used sleds with the horses had on their hoofs 5 caulked steel horseshoes. So these are sort of like metal spikes that drove into the ice. Driving sleighs, and the jockey, or whatever you want to call it, the rider, would control the sleigh using a knife on the runner. So they'd lower this knife, it would scour the ice, as the sleighs, as they ran on the ice, would have a tendency of swinging out. These sleighs were later replaced by bike sulkies. Tom Barber was in contact with me when he heard from Ben that I was doing this presentation, and he gave me a little clipping that was in the Ottawa Journal in February of 1893 about his forefather, Paul Barber, that his horse, Dolly-O, was racing at the Limy Lake ice track, and Dolly-O got loose from Paul Barber, and ran half the way home before stopping. You can see the story. The mare was slightly cut, but the sulky was smashed to pieces. Anyway, this was a very popular event. February 1877, there was 3,500 spectators. Gold and silver medals were awarded, and the citizen marveled that there was no fighting despite a large amount of cordial, i.e. alcohol, consumed. In 1900, racing shifted to the Ottawa River. There's a picture there of the sulkies going around the bend, one of the bends in 1902. The event was usually held in February. The ice was 3 feet thick at the time. Oval was a half-mile track. Against the cold, the horses were fortified with strong coffee. One aristocratic horse called Lady Mary Tudor actually got champagne. Times were slightly slower on the ice than they were on regular dirt tracks. The facilities that were put in place were incredible. Over time, they improved, became more lavish. There was an electrified clubhouse on the ice, heated sheds for the horses, refreshment stands, grandstands. Women were actually came in free. They raised the tone of the event. The races attracted all of Ottawa's upper crust, plus hunters, bettors, and spectators are from far away as New York City. Here's a very interesting postcard, looks like, showing the ice track from the Quebec side, probably taken, well, no earlier than 1902, because you can see the Queen Alexander, or the Interprovincial Bridge in the background. But there you can see people getting ready for the races. Just finishing off horse racing here, the ice races. The apogee for these races was in 1917, most lavish event ever, $23,000 in prize money. But there was dark clouds on the horizon because the government ended gambling because it was the war, and the government said that it was incommensurate with the war effort, and horse racing everywhere in Canada was cancelled. After the war, things did resume when gambling started up again. It was first at Lansdowne Park, briefly back on the Ottawa River ice. You see an ad there in 1921 for Riverview Park Racing Association. But it was very much smaller, the shadow of its former self, only 9,000 in purses. And it went back to Lansdowne Park for ice racing, sort of like on a repaired field with ice over it. Then it disappeared from the Ottawa winter sporting scene until it was revived briefly for Winterlude in the early 1980s. Yeah, okay, I've of course got to say something about the Ottawa Rough Riders, aka the Rough Riders. Ottawa Football Club, aka the Rough Riders. They were, until they folded, the oldest football team in North America. They started in September of 1876 with a meeting at the Rideau Cricket Club, extended to the Russell House Hotel, or they formed the Ottawa Football Club with the colors of cerise and gray with blue knickerbockers. Just a week later, the first game was played. Don't know the score, but they defeated the Aylmore Football Club in apparently a close contest. The team was known as the Ottawas or the Senators. Now, the Rough Riders, how they got the name is kind of interesting. In 1897, the Ottawa Football Club was expelled from the league that they played in, the Quebec Rugby Football Union, for undue roughness. Now, of course, Ottawa fans disputed this. One letter to the editor said that the expulsion was the most disgraceful exhibition of unfairness recorded in Canadian sports. Ottawa was not stopped by this. They quickly joined the Ontario Rugby Football Union. And one of their early games, they defeated Hamilton 9-1. It was a brutal game. Hamilton players said that Ottawa has three of the dirtiest football players that ever played on a Canadian gridiron. And the Hamilton newspaper said that the Westerners, Hamilton, were foully used in the capital. And the Hamilton journalists started calling the Ottawa the Rough Riders. And you see down at the bottom here that the Toronto Star said that the charges of undue roughness should be investigated. Now, why the Rough Riders? Well, 1898 was the Spanish-American War, and Colonel Theodore Roosevelt, later President Roosevelt, was very much in the news. There's a picture of him and his Rough Riders on San Juan Hill in Cuba. And so that's where the name came from. At the same year, Ottawa took new colors, red, white, and black. They had been for the previous few years playing in black and white when they were in the Quebec Union, but they changed their colors when they moved to the Ontario Rugby Union, since the Osgood Football Club colors were black and white already. And so they adopted the red, white, and black, which became synonymous with the Ottawa Rough Riders ever since. And indeed, the Ottawa Red Blacks have continued those colors. In 1898, this is before the Grey Cup, there was the Dominion finals still. In 1898, the final was held in Ottawa between the Rough Riders, the Ottawa Football Club, versus Ottawa College, who was the Quebec Union champ. So this is Ottawa University. They were in part of the Quebec Rugby Union. And again, the Ottawa Rough Riders won in a game that was described as vicious and sometimes brutal, 11-1 the score. And it ended, the game ended with the team undefeated in a 7-game season, scoring 188 points to 24 against. And early December, there was a big celebration of booze up at the Russell House Hotel. And the Ottawa Amateur Athletic Club president, Fred Colson, said, Ottawa has defied the Tigers in their jungle by Hamilton's molehill, which was called a mountain. The Ottawa Football Club president said, the team called the Rough Riders, like Roosevelt's men, and hence the name Rough Riders, which lasted until I guess it was 1996 is when they folded. Here's a picture of the 1898 Dominion champions, the team picture on the left. In the center is a spoof of a very famous painting at the time. It was an 1896 patriotic painting by Maud Earl, which was entitled, What We Have, We Hold. And then you see in the background very faintly are Royal Naval ships with smoke. And you see the Union Jack. And the dog's name was Dimbula, which is a champion bulldog at the time. So you can see on the team photograph, you have the team colors, red, black, and white, and Dimbula's holding a football. Okay, tennis. Well, tennis has a long history, dates back to medieval times, though the modern lawn tennis dates from perhaps the early 1870s. Ottawa was very modern at the time. The first newspaper reference to an indoor tennis court, or any tennis court in Ottawa, was in March 1876. It was built at Rideau Hall. And you'll see just 3 months later, the Earl of Dufferin, he was left Ottawa to take up residence in Quebec City, and he told his staff that it should be open. The tennis court should be opened firstly for younger members of the civil service seeking a healthy recreation in the summer, but then was opened up to everybody. When I say everybody, just men. So it was established as the Vice Regal Tennis Club, which would set the hours and provide balls for people wishing to play tennis. But tennis really got a further hold on the city in October of 1881 with the founding of the Ottawa Tennis Club, later known today and still is today as the Ottawa Tennis and Lawn Bowling Club. It's located over in Cameron Avenue near Brewer Park. Back then, there was initially a grass court at Elgin and Cooper Street. Only 35 members initially. Women could be associate members, but were permitted to play only at certain days and times. In 1888, they moved to Cartier Square. There was 4 full-size courts, and there's a picture of the clubhouse with people out in front. The Marquis of Lorne and his wife, Princess Louise, were ardent tennis players. They were patrons of the Ottawa Tennis Club. And in that photo there, you can see them just to the mid-center of the portrait, of the painting, of the photograph. In April 1883, there was a ladies' lawn tennis tournament played at the Drill Hall under the auspices of the Ottawa Tennis Club. There were 7 participants. There were 3 prizes presented by the Governor General. Ladies did not have to be a member of the Ottawa Tennis Club to join it, but they had to be a member of some type of tennis club. Games, 3 sets, best 4 out of 7 games. Rules were as set by the All England Lawn Tennis Association of that year. And Miss Lily Fleming won first prize, winning every set she played. The prize she received was a handsome brooch, golden crossed rackets with a tennis ball hanging from a chain in the center. I switched to hockey. As the hockey was initially played by the Eastern Indigenous peoples, the Micmac in particular on ponds. Modern hockey dates back to 1875 when Halifax native, a man called James Creighton, who later moved from Montreal to Ottawa, formed some rules and started playing at the Victoria Rink in Montreal. There were 9 players a side, initially reduced to 7 in 1880. These are called Halifax rules. You had a rover, so you have a person that could move around. The puck stayed on the ice. There was no forward passes, no shift changes. Quite a very different game. In 1883, the Ottawa Hockey Club was formed. In 1886, 3 years later, the Amateur Hockey Association of Canada formed. There were 4 Montreal teams: Victoria's, Crystals, Montreal Hockey Club, McGill, and Ottawa. In 1888, Lord Stanley of Preston and his family arrive in Ottawa. He's the new Governor General. And the following year, with his son Edward and his daughter Isabel, they go to the Montreal Winter Carnival. And they go to a hockey game. Actually, the game was partway underway when they arrived, and the play stopped and played the national anthem, and they sat down and watched the game. And they were seemingly instantly smitten with the sport. There was a backyard rink made for the family, and so Edward and his other brothers, Arthur, Victor, and Algernon, all played with staff, and they formed the Vice Regal and Parliamentary Hockey Club, also known as the Rideau Rebels. Here's a picture of the Rideau Rebels in 1889, they're holding Micmac hockey-made hockey sticks. James Creighton is the man with the cap on, mid-left. He's now living and working in Ottawa. Arthur Stanley is the second from the left, the son of Lord Stanley, and Edward Stanley is standing at the far right. And they played, the Rebels played a lot of exhibition games. They really had a hand in popularizing the sport. that vice-regal stamp of approval really helped. And in 1890, Arthur Stanley and two other of the Ottawa, or the vice-regal rebels, formed the Ontario Hockey Association with 13 teams. Okay, Lady Isabel Stanley, she too was smitten by hockey, got the hockey bug, and there she is on the left, looking very proper. But there she is in white, in that very grainy photograph of her stick handling around a number of staff ladies at Rideau Hall. This picture was taken around about 1890. So this is the oldest picture of women playing hockey. The first known women's hockey game that was reported in the press was actually in March of 1889. It was played at the Rideau skating rink, which is now the location of the Arts Hall of U of O, at the corner of, well, then it was called Theodore Street. Now it's Laurier Avenue East at Waller. We don't know the score, but we do know the Government House team on which Isabel Stanley played won the game. They only played 4 aside, so that's a little telling. The usual number at that time was 7 aside, so it must have been quite an open game, and it's sort of testament to how few women were playing, at least in 1889. That was to change in subsequent years quite significantly, particularly in the early 20th century. But that's another story. Now, Stanley Cup, that dates from Ottawa. On the 18th of March, 1892, there was a big party at the Russell House Hotel for the Ottawa Hockey Club, because they just won the Ontario Hockey Association's Cosby Cup. And an aide to the Governor General read aloud a letter from Lord Stanley. Lord Stanley was not able to attend that dinner. But the letter said, "I have for some time past been thinking that it would be a good thing if there were a Challenge Cup, which should be held from year to year by the champion hockey team in the Dominion. I'm willing to give a cup, which shall be held from year to year by the winning team." Now there it is, Stanley Cup, the old cup without the big base on it there is now. It was purchased from a London silversmith for the cost of 10 guineas. And on it was engraved Dominion Hockey Challenge Trophy from Stanley of Preston. And the first winner in 1893 was the Montreal hockey team over Ottawa. Now, switching again, velocipedes and bicycles. Now, this was huge back in the late 1800s. First, a little history. The velocipede was invented in 1817 by a man called Baron Karl von Drais. Now, it was think of a bicycle with no pedals, and so you sort of sat on it and you just moved your feet backwards and forwards and you went down the road. It was revolutionized in 1863 when pedals were added to the front wheel. We're not quite sure who did it. It was either Pierre Michaud or its employee, Pierre Lallemand in Paris. But this new bike, a new invention, became all the rage in France among men and women. And it didn't take long to show up on this side of the world. In 1869, it's made an appearance in Toronto and Montreal, and then in Ottawa. People laughed at this, and certainly the citizen thought this was a pretty strange fad. Here's a quote: "Surely the world is suffering from velocipede on the brain. This mode of locomotion is practically worthless." It went on to saying that in one city in the United States, velocipedes were becoming less and less popular. The popularity, people were giving up the velocipedes for stilts. And there was some truth to what the citizen was saying. The velocipede was also known as the bone shaker. It was heavy and exhausting to ride because the roads were very bad. There were no asphalted roads, and at best you had macadamized roads, which were made out of well, essentially a gravel road. They had prepared tracks to ride your velocipede on, but it was hard going, and quickly people were fined for velocipeding on sidewalks. $1 fine. Here in Ottawa, in 1877, the high wheeler came. also known as the penny farthing. It's the old British coins with the big penny at the front and the small farthing at the back. There's a high wheeler there and on the screen. Mr. Back, he's just an 18-year-old guy. He was a real bike aficionado, and he saw one in a magazine, an American magazine. It was far too expensive for him to buy. It took 6 months' salary for him to purchase it. So he made his own, and he made the frame and handlebars of iron pipe, metal, the pedals were blocks of wood. People were impressed, it worked. And so he actually went on to make a few and to sell them. Many years later, one of them showed up in a secondhand store on Spark Street, and he spotted him. At that point, he was working for Orm's Music. But it really took off, biking took off in the 1890s with the introduction of what was called the low bike, or the low bicycle, or safety bicycle. Now, a safety bicycle is low to the ground, and therefore, if you fell off, you didn't risk life or limb in case of a tumble. It looked very much like the bikes we know today. It had a chain, had two pedals of the same size. Initially equipped with solid rubber tires, but pneumatic tires came in quite quickly. It cost a fortune. The price was $170 here in Ottawa, which is about $5,000 or more in today's money. The first bike actually was bought by in Ottawa, was bought by a syndicate, a 5-person syndicate, and the first to ride was a Dr. McElhinney. He drove to the electric park on Bank Street, from downtown to the electric park on Bank Street, which is near Patterson Creek. Dr. McElhinney was mad about all things mobile. He later went on to purchase the first automobile in Canada. But by 1896, the Humber bike had fallen to a still expensive but more reasonable $65. In 1880, they had the formation of the Ottawa Bicycle Club. Members had a distinctive uniform. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find out what this uniform looked like. 2 years later, they had the establishment of the Canadian Wheelmen's Association in St. Thomas, Ontario, with a branch in Ottawa. And by 1895, there were 250 wheelmen in Ottawa. There was such a special thing that every person with a bike had their name listed in the newspaper. Sunday riding was frowned upon. It was the Lord's Day, Sabbath day, and so the Ottawa Bicycle Club members were told to be discreet were they to ride out on a Sunday. There were bicycle accidents. Reputedly, Sir Hector Langevin was run down by a high wheeler on Parliament Hill, which led to a 5-year ban of biking on Parliament Hill. Now, women quickly adopted the new mode of transportation, and indeed it was seen bicycling promoted female emancipation. Now, you might have known Susan B. Anthony, the American women's rights activist, the picture on the left. She was a very strong advocate of women cyclists. She said, "It gives women a feeling of freedom and self-reliance. I stand and rejoice every time I see a woman ride by on a wheel, a picture of free, untrampled womanhood." And there's a picture taken in Ottawa, actually in Ottawa East, at 54 Main Street by James Ballantyne, of Mabel Williams with a safety bike. She still has a long skirt on, so it must have been tricky riding it, but still, there she is. Should backtrack. Biking became very popular. There was bike races. The first street was asphalted on Spark Street was asphalted, and there was bike races to inaugurate the first asphalted road. When cars came along, biking sort of took a bit of a back seat, as it were. People became car crazy, but biking, of course, continued to be today as a very practical form of transportation and healthy exercise to boot. Now, moving on, I have Norwegian snowshoes, skis, or skilobning. Well, snowshoeing and tobogganing are traditional Canadian winter sports. There's a picture there of a watercolor from 1840 of a Micmac family with a sleigh and snowshoes. This was, of course, adopted by incoming Europeans. And here's a picture taken in 1875 of Lord Dufferin and tobogganing party going down a toboggan hill, it was a prepared hill, close to Rideau Hall. And there's a snowshoe club, ladies' college from 1905, both sports very popular. But something new came along in 1887 with the arrival in Ottawa of Lord Hamilton. He was the ADC to Lord Lansdowne, the Governor General. He was also brother of Lord Lansdowne's wife, Lady Lansdowne. Now, here's a picture, a caricature of him from 1895 in Vanity Fair. He'd previously been at the British Embassy in Moscow, where he worked under Lord Dufferin. Lord Dufferin was, of course, also to be a Governor General here in Canada. And in Russia, he had picked up the sport of Norwegian snowshoes or skis. They're called Norwegian snowshoes because Canadian snowshoes were one way of getting across the snow. And when he came to Ottawa in January of 1888, he tried out his skis on the hills of Rockcliffe near Rideau Hall. And here's a little quote from one of his autobiography. "I brought out my Russian skis to Ottawa, the very first pair that had ever been seen in the New World. I coasted down hills on them and amidst universal jeers. Everyone declared that they were quite unsuited to Canadian conditions." This comes from his book called The Days Before Yesterday. He actually wrote 3-volume, very gossipy, chatty books, autobiography. They're available online, and it's a lot of fun reading them. It's an incredible window into a long lost world, and he's a very agreeable, fun writer. Anyway, there's a picture of skiing at Rockcliffe around about 1895. There were other claimants to the honor of introducing skiing to Canada. One man was a Swede called Anders Nostrom, claims to have introduced the sport to the capital years earlier. Very vague, though. In the Winter Carnival of 1895, he and other Swedes demonstrated the sport carrying the Swedish-Norwegian flags. An Ottawa historian, man called Bro, credited Frau Wetterman, who was the governess for Lord and Lady Aberdeen, saying that she brought it in 1893, but that was certainly later than what Lord Hamilton says. In any event, took off. Norwegian and Russian snowshoes distinguished them from Canadian snowshoes. Skalobner was another name for it, which for obvious reasons did not catch on. Skalobner is apparently the Norwegian roots to the word. But the name, like how do you spell ski, wasn't clear. You can see there's skis, double E's, ski, S-K-E-I or S-K-I. But you can get the sticks and the equipment here in Ottawa. In fact, they were made in Ottawa. They had the Ottawa cane fitting and the Ottawa ski was made here in the capital. It was very much like cross-country skis today, but instead of having 2 poles, we had one 6 to 7 foot single hickory pole with a spike at the end. But the skis themselves, 6 to 7 feet long, maple or birch, roughly 3.5 inches wide, tapered, toe was upturned, central groove underneath with boots attached to the toes. Like I said, very much like cross-country skiing today. And it was very popular, skiing at Rockcliffe Park, later at Lac des Fées in Quebec. Both men and women took up the sport. In the 1890s, the feminine apparel, the standard apparel was shortened skirt with bands of red and black, red mittens, sash, and a toque, a dash of bright color. Very popular among women. Finally, the final thing I want to talk about is actually happened in the beginning of 1905, was the Dawson City Challenge. Now, Joseph Boyle is the manager of this team and brought it to Ottawa. He has an incredible history that this is only the Dawson City Challenge is only a small part of his claim to fame. He's sort of Canada's equivalent of James Bond on steroids. Anyway, he went to the Klondike in the 1898 gold rush, made millions, became known as the King of Klondike. He had realized that the big money was dredging for gold and managed to get a concession from Ottawa over a huge tract of the Klondike River and formed the Canadian Klondike Mining Company in 1904, and he owned much of Dawson City. As I said, he became hugely successful, known as the King of the Klondike. He was also very civic-minded, and he built the main force behind the Dawson Amateur Athletics Association building and rink facilities, and there's a picture of it. This is world-class, best state-of-the-art facility up in Dawson City at the turn of the 20th century. He had a passion for hockey. He set up a 4-team league in Dawson City, and they made an all-star team called the Dawson City Nuggets. And in 1904, they decided to challenge Ottawa for the Stanley Cup. Now, this wasn't a completely wacky idea, as there were class players in Dawson, including Weldie Young, who had played for Ottawa in the 1890s. He was the captain of the Ottawa Senators. And this cheeky challenge was accepted by Ottawa. So the next thing is how to get to Ottawa from Dawson. It's a journey of close to 7,000 kilometers. Now Boyle covers the $6,000 expenses. But the idea was that the team was, once they got there, they play the Stanley Cup and then earn their way back playing exhibition games back to Dawson City. Anyway, they left Dawson on the 14th of December, 1904. All were there except, well, the captain was delayed because he was working with the federal government and couldn't get leave right away. He later caught up, but unfortunately after the Stanley Cup game, their number 2 person also didn't go. His wife was ill and he had to stay behind. Anyway, the team went first to Whitehorse, that's 330 miles, firstly on bicycle, foot, and dog sled. Took 9 days. They had to sleep in cabins owned by the Northwest Mounted Police. Took a train from Whitehorse to Skagway, delayed by snow in the White Pass, which meant they missed their boat to Seattle from Skagway, so they had to wait 3 days for a steamer. Then when they got to Seattle, they backpacked to Vancouver, where they took the train, transcontinental CP train, to Ottawa, arriving almost a month later on the 11th of January, 1905. Here's the team. There's Boyle in the center, manager Boyle, Joe Boyle, and see this team's very small. The guy on the left, front row on the left, is the goaltender Albert Forrest. You can see he's just got cricket pads to guard his shins. Pretty dangerous sport. They're in front of the Dazer rink where the game was played. Now they had asked for a delay of the series because of the long trip. Ottawa Silver 7, they were called, denied the delay. So the 2-game series went ahead. It was most goals after the 2 games was the winner. First game was 13th of January, 1905. It was a full house, 2,500 fans in the arena. Lord Grey, the Governor General, dropped the puck. The Nuggets were dressed in black and gold. And the score was 3-1 at the half, pretty respectable, 3-1 for Ottawa. But it ended at a 9-2 score as Dawson team tired, not surprisingly, after their long trip. It was a brutal game. And Norman Watt, who was the Dawson's left wing, smashed the Ottawa player Art Moore over the head with his stick after being tripped. Moore was out conscious for 10 minutes before it swept off the ice. Notwithstanding something like that, the Ottawa Journal admired the sportsmanship of both teams. So I really hate to wonder what a violent game was like. The second game was the 16th of January, again a full house, but the score was even more lopsided, and it set records that stand even to today. The final score was 23-2 for Ottawa. One-eyed Frank Mcgee, there he is, picture on the left, scored 14 goals. He'd lost one eye to a high stick some years before. He was an incredible sportsman. He also played for football for the Ottawa Rough Riders. The Citizen reported that Dawson never had the chance of a bun in the hands of a hungry young boy. But after the game, there was a big booze up, and the Stanley Cup was kicked in the Rideau Canal. Now, the Nuggets do go on the road back to Dawson City. They end up with a pretty respectable 13 wins, 9 losses, and 1 tie record. So they were certainly a better team than what those Stanley Cup games suggested. It also helped that Weldie Young, their captain. I was back with the team at that point. So there's the picture of the Ottawa 1905 Stanley Cup championship team with Dave Finney, Rat Westwick, Harvey Pulford, Billy Gilmore, Alf Smith, Frank Mcgee, and Art Moore, with the trainer Mac McGilton on the upper left. So that's where I'll stop my presentation. Please, any comments, suggestions, questions? I'll try to field them.
Thanks, James. Yeah, we got a few questions here for you. Actually, I'll start with one that I think someone may have answered in chat, but we'll see if you can answer it. Do we know where on the river horse races were held before moving to Lansdowne?
Well, it's just that picture. Should just downside this thing for a second.
Yeah, well, while you're looking for you, someone seemed to have suggested that in the winter of 1901.
See, there's it looks like it's to the east of the Alexandra Bridge.
Okay, yeah. That's what she was thinking. Someone said here in the winter of 1901, there was a doctors' convention in Ottawa, and they took the time out to watch the horse racing.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I get the feeling it must have been in the downtown area.
Yes, it was. It looks. I think you could access it both from the Ottawa side and the Quebec side. This picture gives an example of where it is, and with the bridge in the background, that places it to the east of the bridge, with an eye shot of Parliament Hill. Yeah.
Maybe they were looking for sponsorship. Was the rugby union? Was rugby played in rugby union rules in the early days, or did they play with modern football rules?
Oh no, it'd be rugby rules. I don't know the sequence of events of how the rules changed, but initially it was rugby rules.
Would it be accurate to say that many sporting pastimes and leisure times in general belonged more to the upper classes than the working classes?
I would think so, yes. Certainly skiing was an upper class activity. The hockey too. I would say yes. Now maybe cricket certainly has the reputation of being a more elitist sport at the time. Baseball, though, was more of I'd say a working class, a whole community type of sport.
Yeah, when you think of bicycle, I think you said a bicycle like in today's money was $5,000.
Yeah,
so,
it was definitely, you had to have
rich.
money. Now the prices certainly came down quickly. Even with a few years, it's down to less than half, and it fell even further. But I would say, like most working people, didn't have a whole lot of free time. So I would have said of all the sports, I would say the baseball probably was the most available to let's say the common person.
I know in the Toronto area, lawn bowling was huge with the well-to-do. It was really popular sport, and oddly enough, they would get, even in the 1910s, they would get corporate sponsorship.
Yeah.
Do you know?
I don't know if there's. It used to be. I think I recall seeing lawn bowling right on Bronson. I don't think they do that anymore. But a number of years ago, you could watch lawn bowling right on Bronson Avenue.
Do you know of any cases where like local businesses sponsored sports?
Yes, they did. Like the horse racing. The prize given to the winning jockey, was donated by a local jewelry store. So there were sponsorships of that nature.
Okay. Yeah, because I know a lot of trophies. The Stanley Cup's unique because it was donated by a person, but very often now in modern day sports, the trophies is a corporate sponsorship. So, comment. Oh, got a comment from Ben here. Let's see if anyone else knew this. Tennis was popular in France in the late 1500s, and he says Champlain called snowshoes les raquettes when he first saw them used by the indigenous people. I didn't know that because I guess they look like rackets.
Tennis was big. Tennis is from a French word tennis, and Henry VIII was a big tennis player. It was a very different game. You bounced it off walls and things like that.
I remember Time Team digging up Henry VIII's tennis courts. Yeah, it was a different game. Yeah, someone else just wrote in a question that I wanted to ask, and someone else mentioned it too, about rowing. Did you know of any rowing events or was the Ottawa River too rough?
I have not researched that. I know there were rowing. There were a lot of boating events on the Ottawa River. That's something I have not yet looked into.
I wonder if there was that
I know
much.
there were like when the Prince of Wales came and opened the houses or put the cornerstone of the center block. There was a number of boats that went out to greet him, both like canoeing as well as sailboats. So those are events I have not have yet to explore.
Yeah, it's possible you may not find much because the Ottawa River might be a little bit too rough for rowing.
There's also a lot of debris, a lot of logs, even back in the 1860s, 50s, 60s, 70s. It was pretty treacherous navigation with all the logs coming down the river.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it was, and if it was popular in this area, again, Toronto and in St. Catharines, but that's because they had enclosed right of ways and old abandoned canals where you could get a flat water. Yeah,
but there were boating clubs at the time, so I'm sure there were.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to find out more about that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, here's someone, Brian Cook, responding. There is a great account of a rowing event educated by Let on the canal. Don't know if anyone knows anything more about that, but it looks like the canal might have, although the canal seems kind of narrow for rowing events, but it might have been a smaller version of the same thing. Someone asked, could you tell us a bit about the hose reel racing?
The hose reel racing, this was between fire departments. The idea was you'd have upwards of 18 men pulling a 350 foot long roll of hose around like a very big spindle, and typically a horse would pull it, but you'd have 18 men pulling this thing as a race, and it was very dangerous because they were strapped into like a harness. So this thing, so you have all these guys running ahead with this very heavy piece of equipment, fire equipment behind them. And if anybody stumbled, they were toast. So, but this was a really big sport. And Ottawa actually had a championship team. It was in Le Breton Flats, they had a team there called the Chaudière Fire Hall. And they went all over upstate New York racing, and it was a big gambling event. They came back with this, big trophy, lots of money, and it sort of went to their heads. They started demanding larger and larger sums of money to compete, and people said, "No, I don't think so." So it was a bit of a fad that lasted for a few years, and then prize money of, let's say, $500, which is a lot of money back then. Then all of a sudden you see prize money $25. So,
okay, someone asked, do you have information on the Ottawa Curling Club, which was operating as of 1863, founded by
I do not. That'd be another sport to look into.
That sounds like it could be a whole presentation on its own. I'm sure there's quite an extensive curling
incredible.
history.
As I said, the amount of sports that went on in this city is just phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm just reading, so we're getting some comments now. I'm just reading them cold here. You can see the athletic fields where the baseball was played and football on the fire insurance plans. They were just south of the Queensway, about where there's the Loblaws now between Queensway and Elgin. Okay, so that's some information there. By 1917, there was what they called skijoring, S-K-I-G-O-R-A-N, riding on skis behind a horse. Have you ever heard anything about that?
Yeah. Because if you go into the 1920s, there's a whole, perhaps another, sports from the 20th century. There's a whole series of new stories to tell. But in the 1920s, you had ski jumping was big in Rockcliffe Park. So that was huge and something quite different.
Yeah, it sounds like we're running out of questions here, but we've had a lot of them. It almost sounds like you could do a second volume
Yeah.
just on like 19th century sports, because there's so many other people asking questions. Oh, Dylan's got one. Ottawa Curling Club has their own Stanley Cup, which predates the more famous hockey trophy. So yeah, a lot more stuff that we could be talked about.
And when you get into like these, Ottawa had in the 1920s had the first women's hockey championship team was here in Ottawa, the Ottawa Alerts. So that's a great story to look into at some point.
Yeah, so yeah, it looks like we're going to have you around for another slideshow, even before we get to the 20th century, because I'm waiting to talk to you some one of these days about the Ottawa Civics and the Ottawa Nationals of the World Hockey Association, but that'll have to come another day. Just one other comment I wanted to make. I just know, living in this area, in Toronto area, there's a huge Southeast Asian population around here. And we had a display at one of the two museums I worked at on cricket. And we just thought we'd get the casual crowd of history-minded people coming by. We got hundreds of thousands over the summer of young people coming by, because cricket again is huge.
Oh yeah.
In the Toronto area, because of a number of Southeast Asian people that live in this area. People of Indian.
That certainly is true. You know, with people from Southeast Asia, from the Caribbean, there's always a great cricket game at Rideau Hall. And that's something that my background was cricket. I grew up in a place that played cricket, so it's fun to go out there to watch.
Yeah, I was just surprised. I thought it was a dead and dying sport, but it turns out it's with the young people.
It's been revived by a lot of new Canadians.
Yeah, which is good. So I think that's it for questions. If we don't have any more questions, someone else just commented.
Excuse me, Richard. I was just noticing another question or two. Somebody had asked where they could find the writings of Lord Hamilton. Of course, that was the book that James was talking about.
It's online. It's online. If you go to my blog site, if you look up skiing, I have a thing on on skiing. In my sources, I have a link to that one book. But there's 3 books. They're all online, and so you just have to click on them and look them up. And they are really great. Some of the stories in them are just wonderful.
Actually, I just Googled the day before yesterday Hamilton, and the Amazon site, the Goodreads site, came up for it.
Oh, good. But there's 2
Somebody else also was asking, do you know where we can find information on the Ottawa Pastimes baseball team who played in Ottawa in the late 1890s, early 1900s? This individual said they have some newspaper stories in the city archives. There's nothing, but would like to know more, as her ancestor was involved with this team.
Gee, that's an interesting. No, I don't have any information.
And somebody else mentioned that there's a book written by Tim Falconer entitled The Klondikers, which tells the story of this team's travel across Canada to play Ottawa in 1905.
Yeah. The whole story of Joe Boyle, he later became known as Colonel Joe Boyle, is absolutely incredible. As I mentioned, he sort of puts James Bond to shame. He goes on, he's reputed the lover of the Queen of Romania, runs his own regiment, funds his own regiment over during the First War. All sorts of medals from the Romanian government, the French government, the British government, and so he's quite an interesting man.
Yeah, we're getting more comments here from people just mentioning there's Canadian curlers from the Ottawa area that went to Scotland for World Curling Championship tournaments in the 19th century. So that's history. So thanks for all the chat comments we're getting. I think we're caught up on questions, Ben, unless you've caught a few more while I was reading others. But obviously a lot of interest in this. So, in fact, I'm really impressed, James, with the research you put into this. I thought the person who had the question about the hose racing, I think they thought they were going to stump you on that one, and yet you knew all about it. So an amazing amount of research as usual, James. It's obviously that you love doing this, and so I'm looking forward to having you be a speaker again sometime soon. I think maybe another one on sports, more in the 19th century.
There's a lot of extra stuff to cover, that's for sure.
Yeah, so I'm hoping we can have you back soon. You're always such a reliable speaker and such a well-researched speaker. And as you have someone just commenting, always so fun to listen to, James. So
Oh,
I agree with
thanks.
that, Jen.
Appreciate
No, go ahead, James.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, so thank you for being our guest speaker again tonight. And yeah, we look forward to hearing from you again. And I didn't, Ben, if you want to take over, usually I write down who our next week's speaker is, but I forgot to do that. So maybe I can pass the closing off to Ben if you want to mention who next week's, or 2 weeks tonight, who the speaker is, Ben, if you're still there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. February the 9th, we can look forward to being joined by June Gervin. It's going to be a conversation with June. And the topic is We Are the Children, Coming to Terms with Our Past. And that's our first presentation for Black History Month. That's on February the 9th at 7 p.m.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Yep. Thanks everybody for coming out.